A debt-pressed plantation, a widowed teacher arrives to count what can be sold. In the kitchen doorway at daybreak, a quiet child with a sky-blue ribbon studies her lips as she reads aloud. Then comes the whisper that changes everything. Be my mommy. But hidden in the margins of a family Bible, Latin words tell of promises made in secret. Wax seals don't match. Ledger pages show names crossed out twice. The overseer's eyes turn cold as winter ground. Patrollers gather. Auction bells prepare to ring. The child must choose, and the woman must prove what law and love can do when paper trails lead to courthouse steps and the truth cuts deeper than any bill of sale. When the final seal is pressed into warm wax and the crowd holds its breath, will a whispered plea become a family, or will it all crumble to dust in the auctioneer's hands? Dawn crept through the kitchen window like a shy cat. Eliza Morrow set her carpetbag by the door and breathed in the smell of cold ash and yesterday's cornbread. The Barrow plantation house stood quiet around her, boards settling with tiny creaks that spoke of debt and worry. She had come to count what could be sold. A child's voice drifted from the pantry, soft, clear, echoing words that hung in the air like song. Eliza followed the sound and found a girl, perhaps 6 years old, sitting on a flour barrel. The child's fingers traced the rim of a tin cup while she spoke to herself in Eliza's exact cadence. 7 jars of peach preserves, the girl whispered, mimicking the inventory list Eliza had read aloud moments before. 3 pounds, salt pork, 1 Bible, family. Eliza's breath caught. The child had repeated her words with perfect pitch, as if the morning light itself had learned to speak. "Hello," Eliza said. The girl looked up. Her eyes were dark and watchful, older than her small frame suggested. A sky-blue ribbon tied her hair back from her face, the only bright thing in the dim kitchen. "I'm Tansy," the child said. "You're the counting lady. I'm Eliza Morrow. And yes, I suppose I am." Footsteps shuffled in the hallway. A woman appeared in the doorway, tall and lean, her apron dusted with herb leaves. She nodded to Eliza with the careful politeness that spoke of too many strangers passing through. "That's Aunt Millie," Tansy said. "She births babies and fixes fevers." Aunt Millie's eyes crinkled. "Child talks like she's announcing the weather. Been that way since she was knee-high to a cricket." She set a basket of herb jars on the table. "You need these labeled for inventory." "Please." Eliza pulled out her ledger book and dipped her pen. The quill scratched across the paper as she wrote. Tansy leaned closer, her breathing soft against Eliza's shoulder. "What's that word?" Tansy pointed to the page. "Chamomile, for fevers and bad dreams." "Chamomile," Tansy repeated, her voice catching each syllable like water in cupped hands. Heavier boots echoed from the porch. A man entered, carrying a wooden box under one arm, grey-haired, stooped, with calloused hands that knew work. He set the box down with a thump. "Isaiah Dorsey," he said to Eliza. "Folks call me Ike. Mr. Silas said to bring you the ledger box." Eliza lifted the lid. Inside lay bound papers, receipts, and a thick leather book with brass clasps. The smell of ink and old parchment rose like a sigh. Tansy climbed down from the flour barrel and pressed close to Eliza's elbow. As Eliza opened the ledger, Tansy's lips moved silently, following along with each line. "Curious little thing," Ike murmured. "Always been that way. Hears everything, remembers more." The kitchen door banged open. Silas Barrow stumbled in, his face pale and drawn, followed by a man with sharp eyes and a mouth that turned down at the corners. This second man wore clean boots and a vest that spoke of authority he hadn't earned. "Miss Morrow," Silas said, his voice thin as morning frost. "This is Ephraim Cade, my overseer." Cade's gaze swept the kitchen and stopped on Tansy. "Child should be in the quarters." "She's helping with inventory," Eliza said. "Slaves don't help, they obey." Cade's words fell like stones in still water. Tansy moved closer to Eliza's side, her small fingers brushing the hem of Eliza's dress. The touch was light as a moth wing, but Eliza felt it down to her bones. Silas slumped into a chair. "The creditors want their accounting by week's end. Every jar, every tool, He stopped, his eyes finding Tansy. "Every soul on the place. I understand." Eliza closed the ledger and stood. "I'll need to see all the papers, bills of sale, purchase records, births and deaths. And manumission documents," Silas added quietly. If any exist. Cade's head snapped up. No freed papers on this place. Never have been. But Tansy was looking at something else, a thick Bible at the bottom of the box, its leather cover worn smooth. She pointed to the edge of a page where cramped handwriting crowded the margin. "What's that say?" she whispered to Eliza. Eliza lifted the Bible into the lamplight. The margin notes were in Latin, written in a careful hand. Her heart quickened as she made out the words, "Libera manumissio," freedom. Manumission. Just family records, Eliza said, keeping her voice steady. But she caught Tansy's eye and saw something spark there: recognition, hope, a question forming. "Read again," Tansy whispered, pressing her sky-blue ribbon into Eliza's palm. The ribbon was warm from Tansy's touch, soft as prayer. Eliza closed her fingers around it and felt something shift in her chest, a door opening, a choice being made without words. Cade's boots scraped the floor. Time's wasting, mornings for work, not reading. But as Eliza tucked the ribbon into her pocket, she caught the echo of Tansy's voice in her mind, clear as the chapel bell that would soon ring across the plantation grounds. "Cam, O mile," the child had said, tasting each syllable like honey. And somehow, in that perfect repetition, Eliza heard the beginning of everything that would follow. The afternoon sun slanted through the parlor windows as Eliza spread the ledger pages across Silas's desk. Cade stood behind her, his breath warm on her neck as he watched every mark she made. "Cattle counts off," he said. "Had 3 head die in the spring flooding." Eliza nodded and made the notation. The numbers told their story: debts mounting, assets shrinking, a plantation bleeding away coin by coin. But something else caught her attention: an entry dated 2 years prior, a name crossed out in different ink, and a debt recorded twice. "This purchase," she said, pointing to a line. "The date doesn't match the bill of sale." Cade leaned closer. "Clerk's error. Happens." But Eliza had worked with ledgers long enough to know the difference between error and intention. She turned the page and found more discrepancies: a birth recorded in January, but baptized in March, according to the chapel register tucked between the pages. Tansy appeared in the doorway with a cup of water for Silas. She set it down gently, then settled on the floor beside Eliza's chair, her presence quiet as candlelight. "That word," Tansy whispered, pointing to the Latin margin again. "Say it with me." "Manumissio," Eliza said softly. "Manumissio," Tansy echoed, each syllable careful and true. Cade's hand came down on the desk with a slap. "Enough Latin lessons. Child's got chores." But Silas raised his head from his hands. "Let her stay. She's quiet enough." As the afternoon wore on, Eliza found herself stealing glances at the Bible margin. The Latin text was clearer now that she'd studied it in better light. A manumission clause, contingent upon witnesses, and a token ring. Her pulse quickened. The chapel bell began to ring across the grounds. Evening service. Silas struggled to his feet, Cade supporting his elbow. "You coming to chapel, Miss Morrow?" Silas asked. "Yes, I think I will." Tansy slipped her hand into Eliza's as they walked across the yard. Her palm was small and warm, trusting in a way that made Eliza's chest tight. The chapel was a simple building, whitewashed boards and plain windows. Inside, oil lamps flickered against the growing dusk. Families filled the pews, white faces in front, darker ones behind, the divide clear as a ploughed line. Reverend Amos Green stood at the front, his voice lifting in a hymn that seemed to map the evening air. But Eliza noticed something strange about the verses. They didn't match any hymnal she knew. Instead, they seemed to point in directions: past the miller's door, where the boatman's lantern swings, when the dogwood blooms white. Tansy hummed along, her voice threading through the melody with impossible accuracy, but sometimes she changed a note, correcting the tune in ways that made the words point elsewhere. As the hymn ended, footsteps echoed from the chapel porch. Deputy Caleb Stroud entered, his patroller's badge catching the lamplight. He surveyed the congregation with cold eyes. "Evening, folks. Just checking passes and papers. Routine." A ripple of tension moved through the back pews. Eliza felt Tansy's hand tighten in hers. Stroud's gaze found them in the middle aisle. "You there, girl. Where's your pass?" Tansy looked up at Eliza, then stepped forward into the space between the pews. Her voice carried clear and strong in the sudden quiet. Be my mommy. The words hung in the air like smoke from a blown-out candle. Every head turned. Stroud's eyebrows rose. Cade's face went hard as winter ground. Well now, Stroud said slowly. Slaves don't get to choose their families. But Tansy kept her eyes on Eliza, waiting. And Eliza, despite every reasonable thought in her head, found herself kneeling down to meet the child's gaze. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Tansy nodded, solemn as a judge. From the porch came Cade's voice, sharp with anger. "Then we sell the choice out of her." The parlor felt smaller with 4 adults crowding around the desk. Cade paced behind Silas's chair, while Aunt Millie stood in the doorway, her arms crossed tight over her chest. Eliza remained seated, the ledger open before her, but her attention was on the kitchen where Tansy waited with a cup of sassafras tea. "Attachment makes slaves difficult," Cade said. "Better to break it quick. Move her downriver where she won't know faces." Silas touched his forehead with shaking fingers. "I need her sale price for the creditors." "You'll get more from the rice plantations," Cade pressed. "They pay premium for young ones who can learn." Eliza's pen scratched against the paper as she made notes in the margin, but her handwriting was steadier than her heartbeat. "What about the manumission clause?" "What clause?" Cade's voice was sharp. Eliza turned the Bible to the Latin notation. "This margin text references freedom upon certain conditions. That's not legal documentation. It could be, if the conditions were met." Aunt Millie stepped forward from the doorway. "Miss Eliza, that child's been asking after a mama since she could walk. She's chosen you, true." Cade turned on her. "Slaves don't choose. This one does," Aunt Millie said quietly. "Always has." Silas looked between them, sweat beading on his pale forehead. "The creditors won't wait for legal arguments. They want their money." "Give me until week's end," Eliza said. "If I can prove the clause, the child's not available for sale. And if you can't." Eliza met his eyes. "Then I'll pay her price myself." The room went silent, except for the tick of the mantel clock and the distant sound of Tansy humming in the kitchen, a wordless melody that seemed to carry the shape of hope. Cade's boots stopped pacing. "Law sits in ink, Miss Morrow, and ink can be changed." But Eliza was already closing the ledger, the key turning in the lock, with a soft click. "Then we'd better make sure we're reading the right ink." Later, as evening settled over the plantation like a quilt, Eliza found herself on the kitchen porch with Tansy curled against her side. The child's ribbon caught the last light, blue, as promises. "Why me?" Eliza asked softly. Tansy tilted her head up, her dark eyes serious. "You listen when I talk. You don't make me small." Across the yard, lamplight flickered in the overseer's quarters, where Cade bent over papers of his own. But here on the porch, with the child's warm weight against her ribs, Eliza felt something she hadn't known since her husband died, the fierce pull of protection, the willingness to stand between a small soul and the world's sharp edges. "What if we can't prove you're free?" Tansy's hand found the Latin margin in the Bible beside them. "Then we make new words." And in that moment, watching the child's finger trace the ancient text with perfect confidence, Eliza began to understand that some choices were bigger than law, deeper than ink, truer than any paper could hold. The ribbon fluttered in the evening breeze, and Eliza made her vow in the language of her heart, wordless, unbreakable, written on the wind itself. Morning brought the sound of horses and the creak of wagon wheels. Eliza woke to find creditors gathering in the yard like crows, their faces sharp with calculation. From the kitchen window, she watched them count fence posts and measure timber stands, reducing a lifetime to numbers on their bills. Tansy stood beside the cold hearth, her ribbon tied careful around her wrist, watching Eliza's face. "They're early," Eliza murmured. "Ike says they smell money like hounds smell fox." Tansy's voice was calm, but her small fingers worried the ribbon's edges. The kitchen door opened and Silas stumbled in, supported by Aunt Millie's strong arm. His fever had worsened in the night, leaving his skin waxy and his breathing shallow. "The Latin clause," he whispered to Eliza. "Can you read it all?" Eliza opened the Bible to the margin notes. In the better morning light, more words became clear. "Manumissio, per testamentum freedom, by witnessed vow, upon presentation of ring and seal." "Ring?" Silas frowned. "My wife had a signet ring," Sapphire stone. Where is it now? Lost when she passed? Or sold? His eyes closed. So much was sold. Aunt Millie brewed herbs in a pot over the fire, steam rising with the scent of chamomile and willow bark. Child needs feeding, she said to Eliza, and you need to see Reverend Amos. Why? That hymn last night had more verses than he sang. The parsonage sat behind the chapel, a small house with herbs growing wild around the door. Reverend Amos Green looked up from his breakfast of corn mush and milk as Eliza knocked. Miss Morrow, come in, come in. And little Tansy, too. His kitchen was neat as a pin, with a well-worn Bible open on the table beside his bowl. Eliza noticed the pages were marked with tiny symbols in the margins, crosses, circles, stars. The hymn last night, Eliza began. Ah, Reverend Amos smiled. You noticed the navigation. Navigation? Verses that map safe doors and dangerous ones. When to travel, when to hide. He pointed to the symbols in his Bible. This mark means the Quaker house. This one, the miller, who asks no questions. This star avoid entirely, Tansy hummed under her breath, the melody from the night before. But again, she changed notes, adjusting the tune in ways that shifted the meaning. She corrects the tempo, Reverend Amos observed. Smart child. Some doors change with the weather. Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Are we in danger? Cade's been asking questions in town, about forged passes, about children who might run. The preacher's voice was gentle but firm. Best to have all your papers in order. What about the ring mentioned in the Bible? Silas said it was lost. Reverend Amos exchanged a look with Tansy, who had stopped humming and was listening with the intensity of a cat at a mouse hole. Lost things sometimes get found, he said carefully, when the right person knows where to look. They found Ike in the stable loft, mending harness by the light from a small window. Straw dust danced in the air, and the smell of leather oil was warm and familiar. When he saw them climbing the ladder, his weathered face creased with worry. Creditors got Cade all stirred up, he said. They want the sale list by tomorrow. Ike, Eliza said, tell me about Mrs. Barrow's ring. The old man's hands went still on the harness. He looked at Tansy, who nodded encouragement. She called me to her deathbed, he said slowly. Fever had her bad, but her mind was clear. She pressed something into my hand and said, for the porch blessing. When the time comes, you'll know. He reached into a gap between the roof beams and pulled out a scrap of cloth. Inside, wrapped careful as a baby bird, lay a gold ring with a deep blue stone. The metal was scratched but solid, the sapphire catching light like captured sky. Tansy's breath caught. It matches my ribbon. The ring did indeed seem to echo the sky blue of Tansy's hair tie, as if they were made to go together. Mrs. Barrow said something about a seal. Ike continued, said the ring would prove what words couldn't. Eliza held the ring up to the window light. The gold band was wider than she'd expected, with tiny marks etched around the sapphire marks that looked like they might fit against wax or clay to leave an impression. We need to compare this to the courthouse seals, she said, but footsteps echoed in the stable below. Cade's voice, sharp with authority, calling for Ike. Quickly, Eliza wrapped the ring back in its cloth and tucked it into her pocket. I'll hide it, she whispered. Ike nodded. Mrs. Barrow always said some promises take time to ripen. That afternoon brought the first test of Reverend Amos's navigation hymn. Eliza needed to visit the courthouse clerk to check on seal records, but Cade had posted one of his men to watch the main road. Following the preacher's coded directions, she and Tansy took the path through the miller's woods, where dogwood blooms hung white as promises. The miller himself stood by his wheel, flower dust in his hair. But when Tansy hummed the hymn's second verse, he nodded toward a back trail that avoided the main thoroughfare. Clerk's office closes at 4, he said without looking directly at them. Side doors usually unlocked till then. They reached the courthouse as the afternoon shadows grew long. The building squatted solid and imposing, with columns that spoke of law and order, but the side door stood ajar, just as the miller had said. Josiah Pike's office was cramped with ledgers and files, the air thick with the smell of ink and sealing wax. Pike himself was absent, but his assistant, a nervous young man with ink-stained fingers, looked up from his copying work. Help you? I need to see seal impressions for the Barrow estate, Eliza said. Legal matter. The assistant pulled out a box of wax impressions, each one pressed into a ribbon and labeled with dates. Eliza found the barrow seals and held them up to compare with the ring in her pocket. Her heart sank. The impressions didn't match the ring's markings at all. But Tansy tugged at her sleeve and pointed to a different box, labeled with older dates. "Try those." The assistant hesitated, then shrugged and pulled out the second box. These seals were older, some of them faded, but the third one down made Eliza's pulse jump. The wax showed the clear impression of a sapphire stone surrounded by tiny etched marks. "When was this made?" she asked. The assistant checked the label. 2 years past, right around the time old Mrs. Barrow died. He lowered his voice. That was a sad business. Fever took her quick, but she was lucid right to the end. Had Mr. Pike called to the house for some kind of witnessing? What kind of witnessing? Don't rightly know. Pike doesn't talk about deathbed business. Eliza made careful note of the date and the seal description. But as they prepared to leave, Tansy pointed to something else, a newer wax impression with a different color and pattern. "That one's wrong," she said quietly. The assistant looked where she pointed. "Oh, that. Someone brought in a pass last week with that seal. Pike said it was a forgery, wrong color wax entirely." Eliza's blood chilled. "What happened to the person with the forged pass?" "Still looking for them, I reckon. Sheriff's got descriptions out." As they hurried back through the Miller's woods, Tansy's hand found Eliza's and squeezed tight. The child's ribbon fluttered in the breeze, and for a moment it seemed to carry all their hopes and fears on its sky-blue wings. "The seal's real," Eliza said. "The ring matches." "But Cade's got a false one," Tansy replied. "He's planning something." They were still deep in the woods when they heard hoofbeats on the main road, fast, urgent, heading toward the plantation. By the time they reached home, Silas was barely conscious in his bed, with Aunt Millie spooning herb tea between his parched lips. "Fever spiked," Aunt Millie reported. "He's been calling for his wife, talking about promises and porch lights." Eliza sat by the bedside and took Silas's burning hand in hers. "The ring," she whispered. "The porch blessing. Tell me what your wife wanted." Silas's eyes opened, clouded with fever but focused on her face. She said, "If the child ever chose, the blessing would hold in law." His words came in gasps. "Witnessed before God. Binding as any paper." "Where was the blessing given?" "Front porch, sunset, preacher and the stable hand." She made them promise. His eyes found Tansy, who had crept close to the bed. The child began to hum, not the navigation hymn this time, but something softer, a lullaby that seemed to come from memory itself. As her voice rose and fell, Silas's breathing grew easier. His grip on Eliza's hand relaxed. "One day," he whispered, "set the papers right." And for that moment, in the circle of Tansy's wordless song, it seemed possible that one day might be enough. But morning brought Cade's countermove. Eliza woke to shouting in the yard and the sound of things breaking. She rushed to the window to see Cade, directing 2 hired men as they ransacked the smokehouse and overturned feed barrels. "Looking for stolen property," he called when he saw her. "Someone's been hiding things that don't belong to them." Tansy pressed against Eliza's side, her ribbon pale in the morning light. "He knows about the ring." They watched in horror as the men found the grease-stained ledger page that Ike had hidden under the bacon crates. Cade held it up to the light, his smile sharp as a blade. Well, looks like someone's been keeping extra records." He folded the paper and tucked it into his vest. "Forgery's a hanging offense, Miss Morrow." "That's not forged, it's the original," says you. "But who's going to believe a widow woman over the word of a legal overseer?" One of his men emerged from the stable loft, with the ring's hiding place, the cloth wrapping that still held Mrs. Barrow's scent. Cade examined it with satisfaction. "And theft, besides. This ring belongs to the estate." "It belongs to the porch blessing," Eliza said, but her voice sounded thin even to her own ears. Cade's hand closed around Tansy's arm. "Child's going to town this afternoon. Transport's already arranged." "You can't?" "I can, and I will," he nodded to his men. "Pen her up till the wagon comes." As they dragged Tansy toward the old corn crib, the child managed to slip her ribbon off her wrist. It fluttered to the ground near Eliza's feet, a small blue signal in the dirt. "Don't forget the words," Tansy called before the crib door slammed shut. Eliza picked up the ribbon, her hands shaking. The words, the Latin clause, the porch blessing, the navigation hymn, all of it useless if she couldn't prove it in time. But as she stood in the yard with Cade's laughter echoing off the plantation walls, she realized that Tansy had given her something more than a ribbon. The child had given her a choice fight for what was right, or watch it disappear forever. The afternoon sun slanted long through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell began to toll. Thunder rolled across the sky like wagon wheels on a wooden bridge. Eliza paced the kitchen floor, the ribbon twisted around her fingers while rain drummed against the windows. Tansy had been locked in the corn crib for 3 hours, and Cade's transport wagon would arrive with the morning light. Reverend Amos appeared at the kitchen door, his hat dripping and his Bible tucked inside his coat. "Storm's getting worse. Bridge might not hold." "Good," Eliza said fiercely. "Maybe the wagon can't cross." "That's what I'm hoping." He pulled out his Bible and showed her the marked verses. "But we need to move tonight, storm or no storm." Aunt Millie looked up from tending Silas, whose fever had broken but left him weak as a newborn colt. "Jonah Reed's got his ferry tied up at the bend. If the signal's right, he'll cross." "What signal?" Reverend Amos hummed the 3rd verse of his navigation hymn, the one Tansy always corrected. "Lantern angled 3 ways, 2 swings, then hold steady. And, if he doesn't see it, then we trust the Lord and the current." The kitchen door opened and Ike slipped in, his coat soaked through. "Got the child," he whispered. "Crib lock's been loose for years. She's waiting in the stable." Eliza's heart leaped. "How did you—" "Child's got more sense than grown folks sometimes." "Worked the latch quiet while Cade's boys were drinking in town. They'll notice she's gone. Not till morning, if we're lucky. Storm's got them holed up." Through the window, lightning split the sky and showed the swollen creek racing toward the river. The covered bridge swayed in the wind, its timbers groaning under the strain. "We go now," Eliza decided, "before the bridge gives way entirely." The mule picked its way through the mud with Tansy's small hands guiding its reins. The child seemed to know every root and stone on the path, leading them around washouts and fallen branches with the confidence of long familiarity. "How does she know this trail so well?" Eliza asked Ike, who walked beside the mule's head. "Been exploring since she could walk." "Mrs. Barrow used to say the child could find her way home from anywhere, just by listening to the land." The storm had turned the world into a confusion of wind and water. Trees thrashed overhead, their branches reaching like desperate arms, but Tansy's voice cut through the noise, humming the navigation hymn in a way that seemed to part the darkness. They reached the bridge just as a section of railing tore loose and tumbled into the racing water below. The wooden planks bounced and flexed with each gust of wind. "Won't hold much longer," Ike shouted over the storm. But Tansy had already started across, the mule's hooves finding sure footing on the slick planks. Halfway over, she stopped and pointed downstream. "2 swings, then hold," she called back. Eliza followed her gaze and saw a lantern moving on the far bank, 2 wide arcs through the rain, then a steady glow. Jonah Reed was there, waiting. They made the crossing just as the bridge's center beam cracked with a sound like gunfire. Behind them, the structure twisted and partially collapsed, leaving only broken timbers jutting from the banks. "No going back now," Reverend Amos said. On the far shore, Jonah Reed emerged from the shelter of his ferry house, a compact man with river-wise eyes and hands that knew rope and current. He helped them aboard his flat-bottomed boat without question, though his glance took in their bedraggled condition with understanding. "Heard there was sickness at the Barrow place," he said carefully. "Getting better," Eliza replied, matching his careful tone. "Good to hear. Sometimes a change of air helps with healing." As they pushed off into the current, Tansy settled beside Eliza in the stern, her ribbon still tied around Eliza's wrist where she'd placed it during their flight. The child's eyes reflected the lantern light as she watched the dark water slip past. "Are we safe now?" Eliza whispered. "From the storm, maybe. But Cade's got friends on both sides of the river." As if summoned by her words, lights appeared through the rain riders following the bank road, their torches flickering like angry stars. Even over the storm noise, they could hear Cade's voice bellowing orders. "There," one of the riders pointed toward the ferry. "On the water." Jonah angled his pole to catch the current's strongest pull, but the ferry was heavy-loaded and slow. The riders were gaining, their horses splashing through the shallows where the river ran thin. "Can you make the far landing?" Eliza asked. Jonah shook his head. "Current's wrong. We'll fetch up on the sandbar." "Which one?" It was Tansy who answered, her voice clear despite the wind. "The second one, where the willows lean over." "How do you know?" "The hymn says so, but not the way Reverend Amos sings it, the way it really goes." She began to hum, her melody weaving through the storm sound. And somehow, in her corrected version, Eliza heard the shape of the river itself, where the channel ran deep, where the bars waited to trap unwary boats, where safety lay hidden in plain sight. "Follow her voice," Jonah said, adjusting his pole. "Child knows water like fish know swimming." The mule snorted and shifted as the ferry bumped against the sandbar. But instead of grounding them, the contact seemed to guide them into a narrow channel that cut between the mud banks. Tansy's humming rose and fell with the water's rhythm, leading them through passages that looked impossible in the lantern light. Behind them, Cade's riders had reached the water's edge, but their horses shied from the current's power. One man tried to follow on foot and immediately sank to his knees in the soft bottom. "Lost them," Jonah breathed, as they slipped into the quiet water beyond the bar. But Tansy had stopped humming. She pointed toward the landing where more lights, waited men with official-looking badges, and the cold patience of those who knew their quarry had nowhere left to run. "Patrollers," Ike whispered. "They've boxed us," Reverend Amos added. The ferry drifted in the still water between the searching lights, hidden for the moment by the storm and darkness. But dawn would come, and with it, the end of their choices. Unless... Tansy tugged at Eliza's sleeve and held up something small, a fragment of ribbon with dark wax pressed into its fibers. "From the courthouse," she whispered. "The real seal. I saved a piece when you weren't looking." Eliza stared at the tiny evidence, her heart racing. The wax was indeed a different color from what Cade had shown, madder red instead of brown, the true shade of Josiah Pike's official seal. "You remember the color exactly?" "Always do. Colors don't lie like words sometimes do." And in that moment, watching the child's serious face in the lantern light, Eliza understood that their flight had been leading them not away from the law, but toward it. Not toward hiding, but toward the one place where truth still mattered more than power. "We're going back," she said. "Back where?" Jonah asked. "To town, to the courthouse, to Josiah Pike." "Miss Eliza," Ike protested, "that's walking into their hands." "Maybe, or maybe it's walking into the light." She looked at Tansy, who nodded with calm certainty. "Sometimes the only way through is straight ahead." As the storm began to clear and the first pale hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, they turned the ferry toward shore and whatever waited in the growing light of a new day. The courthouse steps were slick with rain as the early morning crowd began to gather. Word had spread through the night: escaped slave, forged papers, a white woman in trouble with the law. People came to see justice done, or at least to witness whatever drama would unfold. Cade stood near the courthouse door with Deputy Stroud and several men Eliza didn't recognize. Their faces were hard with satisfaction, like hunters who had cornered their prey at last. But beside the steps, a familiar figure sat hunched on a wooden bench: Josiah Pike, the courthouse clerk, apparently just returned from wherever he'd been traveling. His saddlebag still dripped with road mud, and his face showed the weariness of a man who'd ridden through the storm. Eliza took Tansy's hand as they approached. The child's ribbon fragment was tucked safe in Eliza's pocket, along with the family ring that Ike had retrieved during their river crossing. "Mr. Pike," she called. "I need to file a legal challenge." Cade stepped forward. "She's got no standing, harboring a runaway and forging papers." "That so?" Pike's voice was dry as autumn leaves. He looked at Eliza with eyes that had seen too many courthouse dramas to be easily impressed. "What's your challenge, miss?" "I have evidence of a valid manumission recorded in a family Bible, witnessed according to law, and sealed with this ring." She pulled out the sapphire signet, its blue stone catching the morning light. Pike took the ring and examined it closely. "Looks familiar. Where'd you get it?" "Mrs. Barrow's deathbed bequest." "For a porch blessing," she said. "You witnessed yourself." The clerk's expression shifted. "Sarah Barrow. Yes, I remember. Lucid as a bell despite the fever. Made me take down her exact words." He looked at Tansy with new attention. This the child she spoke of? Yes, sir. Well then. Pike stood up, suddenly all business. Let's have a look at this evidence. Cade's face was darkening. The child's on the sale list. Legal bill of sale. Legal, according to what? Pike was opening his seal kit, warming a stick of red wax over a small flame. Let me see this bill. As Cade produced the papers, Tansy whispered to Eliza, "Wrong color wax. Tell him." "Mr. Pike?" Eliza said. The child noticed something about the seals on those papers. "Says the wax color doesn't match your office." Pike examined the documents Cade had handed him, then looked at the fragment of ribbon Eliza produced. His eyebrows went up. "This is my wax, all right. Madder red, just like I've used for 15 years. He held up Cade's papers. "But this here's brown wax. Different seal entirely. Clerk's error," Cade said quickly. "No error." Pike's voice was getting harder. "This is a forgery. And a poor one at that." The crowd was pressing closer now, sensing the turn in the proceedings. Eliza saw faces. She recognized Aunt Millie supporting a pale but determined Silas, Reverend Amos with his Bible tucked under his arm, even the nervous courthouse assistant who had helped them find the old seal records. "The ring," Pike continued, pressing it into his warm wax. "Let's see if it matches what I've got on file." The impression was perfect sapphire stone, surrounded by tiny etched marks, identical to the seal ribbons in Pike's official records. "That's Sarah Barrow's ring, all right. She pressed it into my wax 2 years ago when she made her deathbed declaration." "What declaration?" Stroud demanded. Pike pulled out a leather portfolio and found the document he wanted. "Manumission upon witnessed blessing. Child to be freed upon choosing a family and presenting the ring as proof. That's not legal. It is, if it's properly witnessed." And this one was. Pike's eyes found Reverend Amos in the Pike crowd. "Preacher, you remember the porch blessing?" Reverend Amos stepped forward. "I do indeed. Mrs. Barrow made us promise to honor it if the time came." "Time's come," Pike declared. "Question is, child, do you choose this woman as your family?" Tansy looked up at Eliza, her dark eyes serious as a judge. "Be my mummy," she said again, but louder this time, clear enough for every person on the courthouse steps to hear. "And you, Miss Morrow? Do you accept this child as yours in law?" Eliza knelt down so she was level with Tansy's face. "Are you sure, even with all the trouble it might bring?" Tansy nodded, then reached for the ribbon around Eliza's wrist and tied it carefully around her own small hand. Family chooses family. Pike smiled, the first genuine expression Eliza had seen from him. Then, by the authority of Mrs. Barrow's witness declaration and the presentation of the family ring, I declare this child legally freed and placed in the guardianship of Miss Eliza Morrow. The crowd's murmur was split between approval and dismay, but Pike's voice carried over it all. Any objections can be filed in writing with supporting evidence. Forged papers won't be accepted. Cade's face had gone from dark to pale. You can't the creditors. Creditors got no claim on a freed child. Silas's voice was weak but clear as he pushed through the crowd. And no claim on my conscience neither. He looked at Eliza and Tansy with something like peace in his fever-bright eyes. Sarah would be proud. As Pike made his official notations and prepared the legal documents, Tansy slipped her hand into Eliza's and squeezed tight. The sky-blue ribbon fluttered between their joined fingers, bright as hope in the morning light. "What happens now?" Eliza whispered. "Now," said a voice behind them, "we go home." They turned to see Aunt Millie with a basket over her arm and Ike leading their old mule. "That is," Aunt Millie continued with a smile, "if you're planning to stay on as teacher, Silas could use help with the books, and there's children hereabouts who need schooling." Eliza looked down at Tansy, who was humming under her breath, not the navigation hymn this time, but something new, something that sounded like morning and possibility and all the words they'd found together. "What do you think?" she asked the child. Tansy's answer came in perfect pitch, clear as church bells. "Home first, then the road we choose." And as they walked together across the courthouse square, with the legal papers safe in Pike's hands and the ribbon bright between their fingers, that road seemed to stretch ahead of them like an invitation, full of light and promise and all the families that wait to be born in the choosing. The afternoon sun painted the Barrow plantation house in shades of gold and forgiveness. Eliza sat on the front steps with the legal documents spread across her lap, while Tansy traced letters in the dust with a stick. The child's penmanship was careful and precise, each curve practiced until it matched the shape in her memory. "Write family," Eliza suggested. Tansy's stick moved through the dirt. F-A-M-I-L-Y, each letter clear as printing. "Now write your name." The stick hesitated, then began again. T-A-N-S-Y-M-O-R-R-O-W. Eliza's breath caught. "Is that what you want? To be a Morrow?" "If it fits." Tansy looked up with solemn eyes. "Does it fit?" "Like it was made for you." Footsteps echoed from the house as Silas emerged with Aunt Millie's help. His fever had broken clean, leaving him weak but clear-headed, and for the first time since Eliza's arrival, his smile reached his eyes. "Legal papers all in order?" he asked. "Pike did everything proper. Tansy's free and clear, with guardianship transferred to me." Eliza folded the documents carefully. "Question is, what happens to the plantation?" "Creditors took what they could claim. House and 50 acres stay with the family, thanks to Sarah's will." Silas settled on the porch swing, his color better than it had been in days. "Place needs a school, and I need a bookkeeper. Job's yours if you want it." "Both jobs?" "Both. Pays not much, but it comes with a house and good neighbors." Tansy's stick had moved to new words in the dirt. "Teacher mummy." "Looks like someone's already decided," Aunt Millie observed with a chuckle. As evening approached, others began to arrive. Reverend Amos came with his Bible and a small bouquet of dogwood blossoms. Ike appeared from the stable with his hair combed and his best shirt clean. Even Jonah Reed had made the trip from the river, carrying a carved wooden toy boat for Tansy. "Figured we ought to finish what we started," Reverend Amos said. "That porch blessing Mrs. Barrow wanted." He opened his Bible to a passage about children and families, about love that chooses rather than blood that binds. As his voice rose in the gathering dusk, Tansy slipped her hand into Eliza's and stood quietly beside the porch rail. "Do you, Eliza Morrow, take this child as your daughter-in-law and love, to raise and protect according to God's will?" "I do. And do you, Tansy? Choose this woman as your mother, to honor and trust as family?" "I do choose," Tansy said clearly. "I choose her," Reverend Amos smiled. "Then by the authority of heaven, and witnessed by this gathering, I declare you mother and daughter, bound in love and law." The evening air filled with voices as the small congregation joined in the hymn, the real version this time, with all its verses about safe harbors and faithful friends and roads that lead to home. Tansy's perfect pitch wove through the harmony, her voice bright as the ribbon that still bound her wrist to Eliza's. When the song ended, Silas stood slowly and held out an envelope sealed with red wax. "One more thing," he said. "Sarah left instructions. If the porch blessing ever took place, I was to give this to the child." Tansy opened the envelope with careful fingers and pulled out a deed property, papers for 20 acres of good farmland adjacent to the schoolhouse, signed and witnessed, with her new name already written in Sarah Barrow's careful hand. "She knew," Eliza breathed. "Somehow she knew you'd choose." "Mrs. Sarah always saw clear," Aunt Millie said softly, "even when the rest of us were stumbling in the dark." As the neighbors began to drift away, leaving quiet blessings and promises of help in the days ahead, Eliza found herself alone on the porch with Tansy curled against her side. The child's breathing was soft and even, her fingers still twined around the blue ribbon. "Are you truly sure?" Eliza whispered to the gathering night. "About all of this?" Tansy's answer came without her opening her eyes. "Sure as morning, sure as my ribbon, sure as you listening when I called." Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, the chapel bell tolled the evening hour. The sound carried across the plantation grounds like a blessing, reaching every corner where shadows gave way to lamplight and doubt gave way to hope. Eliza pulled the child closer and rested her chin against Tansy's hair. Tomorrow would bring lessons to plan and books to balance, letters to teach and love to live. But tonight, in the circle of porch light and cricket song, they were simply what they had chosen to be. A family born not of blood but of courage, witnessed not by law alone but by the deeper truth that some bonds are made in the heart's own country, where choosing and being chosen are the same sweet word. The ribbon fluttered once in the night breeze, catching starlight like a promise kept, and settled into stillness.